narcissist, toxic, boundaries. These are topics that are of great interest to folks these days on the internet. And as a psychiatrist, I'd like to share a few thoughts with you. My name is Paul Looney, and I love what I get to do, helping people to navigate difficult times in their life, whether it's a loss or depression, a difficult relationship, anxiety, or some serious illness. It's my pleasure to walk with them through those transitions in life. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is helping people navigate difficult relationships. And of course, there are plenty of people out there who are difficult. Sometimes I'm one of them. And I believe it's very important for us to understand how we can maintain our sense of integrity, our sense of peace, and our sense of power in the face of relationships that are threatening. Now, one of the concerns that I have is that there's a big move in our culture for people to back away from things that they find offensive or difficult or painful or anxiety provoking. When we feel threat, many of us tend to back away like we would from a hot stove if we're a small child, particularly if we've been burned. It's the most natural thing to back away from something that has harmed us. But it turns out that in order to grow, we actually have to learn to approach and move toward those things that make us uncomfortable, to take risks, to enter the danger, to step out of our comfort zone. And so I'm deeply concerned when there are voices in my field, counselors, psychologists, other people that are all about withdrawing from situations that are difficult or painful or fraught with anxiety. And of course, if you are dealing with someone with narcissistic personality disorder or someone who is extremely self-righteous, you do need to have a way to limit contact when necessary. Sadly, when you back completely away from something that causes anxiety, you actually give it more power. I work with people, for instance, who have panic disorder. And if, for instance, they had a panic attack going across a bridge, they would naturally want to avoid crossing a bridge because panic attacks are hell. They're terrible. And so who would want to risk having another one? The problem is if you avoid bridges, then you may also find yourself having a panic attack just on the highway. And then you think, oh, I've got to avoid driving on the highway or have a panic attack in the grocery store or at church. And you back away from those circumstances that might trigger panic. Well, if you do that, and I've seen it happen on many occasions, your world begins to shrink and you begin to become more and more at the mercy of your fears and your anxieties rather than being able to manage them and to press into those things. It turns out that the way to overcome fear is to face it, to walk through it. And my worry about a lot of people I work with and see on the internet is that when they choose to separate themselves from the source of distress, they're actually giving that person or paradigm a power that it doesn't really deserve. You deserve to be able to step into any situation with the confidence that with God's help you can navigate it well. Now, it doesn't mean that we deliberately put ourselves in relationship with the people that are most difficult. In fact, we want to be able to limit those situations and to practice managing them. It's kind of like someone who has a fear of riding an elevator. They're claustrophobic. You don't expect them to face their fear by immediately jumping on an elevator and riding to the top of a 76-story building. No, you get them to approach the thing that they're afraid of little by little and get used to it. Eventually, though, hoping that they will overcome it. My middle son has had more than his share of allergies, and so for a time he took allergy shots, and those shots gave him a little bit of exposure to the thing that caused the reaction, and by taking that shot every week, when he did encounter mold or dust or anything that was going to trigger an allergic reaction, the reaction was smaller because he was being acclimated to that particular thing. So The corollary in a relationship is that oftentimes what we need to do with someone who's a difficult person is to have exposure to that person, but in limited amounts, a limited period of time, or in a context where there's some clear-cut boundaries, and where there's an easy avenue of exit if things go badly. Certainly, it's very valuable to have expectations. And when people talk about boundaries, I get a little nervous because a lot of times what I think people are talking about are rules that they lay down that other people must follow, rather than understanding that expectations or requests are things that we can make in any relationship. If I throw a party, I can let people know what time to arrive and what to bring, what's acceptable attire, because it's my party, and if you want to be a part of it, then you'll come at the appropriate time, dressed in the appropriate way. So your life is a party you can invite people to, and it's perfectly fine to let them know what's acceptable, what's not. For instance, I am very uncomfortable with people using God's name in a flippant way. I know that some people see nothing wrong with that, and they're not meaning to be disrespectful. But when they're in my company, I ask them to honor my request and just be aware of that. And if they slip, I can remind them if I need to. But it's not that I'm saying, well, this is my boundary, you have to do this. If they consistently ignore my request, then that means something to me, and I have to decide whether or not the friendship or the relationship is worth maintaining, given the fact that they don't care about my feelings about this particular thing. And so what I want to suggest today is that what may be more powerful in thinking about managing relationships with difficult people is not so much boundaries as much as gating. And what do I mean by gating? Well, I believe that we should have emotional gates that we can open and close if the situation is safe or unsafe. Sometimes with my wife, she needs to be able to close the gate emotionally because I'm in a stew. I'm gnarly or irritable, and so she can't afford to be completely open to me when she realizes that I'm not in a good place emotionally. She needs to have that emotional gate so that she can stay calm when I'm upset. We see this with mothers and toddlers. When the toddler is having a tantrum, it's very important for mom to have an emotional gate so that she doesn't get sucked into that. Now, when the baby's an infant, the gate can be wide open. And when the baby's upset, mom can be upset with the baby and show it on her face. When the baby's happy, mom can be happy. But when the child advances a little bit and becomes that terrible two that we talk about, then the mom needs to stay calm when the baby is upset. Now, this is pretty easy to navigate with a little toddler because we realize I'm big, they're small. In relationships with other grown people, especially if it's someone who's our parent or pastor, an authority figure or boss, sometimes we're tempted to see them as much bigger and we feel more threatened by their emotions. Now, it is true that sometimes the threat is physical. This person could actually hurt me physically, in which case I need to seek safety. But in most cases, it's an emotional vulnerability that largely depends on how I see myself in relationship to that person, and whether I see that what they're saying or doing is coming from a place of maturity and strength or coming from a place of immaturity and weakness, because then I take it very differently depending on what I see. Now, an illustration of this principle that I love comes from Scripture. In the Bible, we're told that God instructed his people to put the temple and in a place that was elevated, and it was on a hill. The city was called Jerusalem. Now, I've had the privilege of visiting there, and it's a glorious experience. One of the things you'll see if you get to go visit is that the old city of Jerusalem is surrounded by a big, fat wall. It's pretty enormous. And for that reason, it could have safety. Now, the fact that it was elevated was also a benefit. And whenever we keep our thoughts in an elevated place, we keep our connection with God strong, and we are in a good place spiritually, we are much less vulnerable to attack, just like Jerusalem was. But back to our point of boundaries and gating, Jerusalem means possessor of peace. Now, I want that for me. I want it for you. I want us all to be possessors of peace. And one of the reasons that we can have that is if we maintain secure borders on our emotional city, whether we have a wall, so to speak. Now, those of you who were abused as children, either emotionally or physically or sexually, that wall got busted down. And so for you, there's a need to rebuild the wall. And you do that partly by backing away from relationships with people enough to get your groundings with God and to find your sense of value, your sense of self in Him, and to rebuild those walls that have been busted down. But aside from the walls, we also need gates in those walls. And Jerusalem had a number of gates. One gate was the fish gate. One was the dung gate. There was the eastern gate. There were different gates, and when it was safe, when it was light time, when it was light and everything was peaceful, those gates were flung open, and people could come in and out. They would bring in the good and take out the bad. And that's what we hope with the best relationships. With our best friends, we can take in the good and release the bad and have that sweet interchange of open emotional ingress, egress that we love in relationship. But when it got dark in the ancient days of Jerusalem, those gates would be shut. Or if there was an enemy approaching, the gate would be shut so that bad things couldn't come in. There were times when the walls of Jerusalem did get knocked down by an enemy, and in those times, any stray fox could climb over the wall. And when you're depressed, when you're anxious, when you're going through really tough time, your ability to keep the bad out and the good in could be compromised. And there are times when you do need to isolate. And people who are depressed often will withdraw from relationships. But then as you reconnect with your own soul and reestablish those boundaries, you need to go back into a mode where you're willing to open the gate, let people in, but only to the extent that they're safe. So what I'm hoping for all of us and all of you who are watching, I'd be interested in your comments, but I think that while taking a break from a difficult relationship can make all the sense in the world, I want to encourage all of you to find a way to get your bearings so that, particularly in relationships where it's important to keep that connection, whether it's a family member or a long-term friend, that you find a way to renegotiate that. Again, by clarifying if there's been a violation in the past, if there was something that was said or done that was disrespectful or rude, then Jesus says, if your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. So you don't just overlook the offense. You've got to go back into it. But rebuke means that you don't step away from the relationship unless you press in and say, hey, this was hurtful. I didn't like this. I need an apology. Now, of course, there are plenty of people that struggle to apologize. They justify, they excuse themselves. And if that's the case, you can certainly say, if you don't care that you hurt me, then I'm not sure I care to be in relationship with you. Because if a person is completely impervious to your feelings, they don't care that they hurt you. And a lot of times hurt is not intentional. I've hurt people that I love deeply without intending to do so. In fact, most of the times I've hurt my wife was not because I thought, I want to hurt her, but I was thoughtless or careless, or I was letting my own frustrations leak out in an unhealthy way. I hadn't processed my feelings with God. But if you do find that the person is willing to say, I get it, I'm sorry, I was wrong, then creating structures that will keep that harm from happening again are very important. I tell people if you dance together, if you dance closely, you're bound to step on each other's toes. it's going to happen that I'm going to say or do something that will be offensive or hurtful or unfortunate with the people that I'm in relationship with, especially the people that I am the closest to. But when that happens, if they say ouch, then I can apologize for hurting them. Even if it was unintentional, even if in some sense it was even their fault that I stepped on their toe, it doesn't matter. What matters is, do I care that I caused harm to another person? And can I show in my actions, my words, and my face that I am sorry for the harm that I've caused? And if so, then I can humbly ask forgiveness and we can re-navigate the relationship. It may not be quite the same after the offense, especially if it's a big offense. But with repentance, we believe that we can do for others what God has done for us through Jesus Christ. The Bible says that we should forgive as we're forgiven, give as we've been given. And our prayer in following Jesus' example in the Lord's Prayer is, Father, forgive us as we forgive those who sin against us. So think about how you're forgiving those who've sinned against you. Do you forgive them but forget them? Or do you forgive them and invite them to navigate a better, healthier, more respectful relationship than before? So think about the things that I'm suggesting. Think about emotional gating and how important it is for you to be a possessor of peace that is relatively immune from the attacks of others. I believe there are some really great strategies for dealing with difficult people and asking them to repeat what they said if it was the least bit off or snide or disrespectful. Often is a strategy that will help them to be more mindful of the way that they're communicating and what they're expressing. You can also ask them what their intention was. But I want to encourage all of you to think about pressing into uncomfortable circumstances rather than avoiding them. Again, a temporary break in a relationship can be helpful, but try to get strong enough that when someone does something that's hurtful or irritable or frustrating, that you can address it sooner rather than later. Sometimes when something happens with someone we're vulnerable to, we're not even aware in the moment that we've been sniped or wounded. And we have to think about it, and then we start getting upset about it. But we want to reduce that gap so that over time we're quicker to bring it up. Because if we wait and address the offense long after it happens, even though it seems very fresh for us, the person who did the crime may have no memory of it, may not have even known that they stepped on your toes. And so the sooner you can bring it up, the better for them and for you. You don't want to carry around something that does not belong to you. And let's face it, even though other people's behavior can hurt us deeply, a lot of times it's not really our problem. It's their problem that we are being affected by, their pain. The old saying is, hurt people hurt people. And the people that hurt you the most are probably people that themselves have been wounded and need healing. One possibility for healing is for you to point out to them where they have missed the mark in the relationship with you. Obviously, when God asked Cain where his brother was, he says, well, my brother's keeper. It's easy sometimes to absolve ourselves responsibility for engaging other people, especially if they've done something that's hurt us. But my belief is that we are all connected, that we all belong to the same God, and we all have the Spirit of God within us. So I want you, if you're in a relationship with me, to be quick to let me know if I have stepped on your toes. And to be fair, I have some of those qualities of people that might be described as narcissistic. Sometimes I tend to get wrapped up in self-righteousness, and I've had family members that have distanced themselves from me, and it's very painful. So I want you, and I want you to know about me, that I would invite your feedback. And undoubtedly, even in this video, I may have said something that's deeply offensive to someone. And if so, let me know in the comments, and I hope to be able to apologize because that is not my intention. My intention is to empower you to be able to be in the world in a way that you feel safe because you know that you can shut the gate if you're in the presence of a person who is not safe, or simply leave if needed. So, whatever you're up against in your world right now, I pray that you will feel sturdy, you'll feel strong, you'll feel empowered to live authentically and to speak up when you need to rebuke your neighbor when it's necessary, and to be able to uh, restore relationship when it's possible. Well, I hope this video is helpful. I'd love to have your comments. Please subscribe to my channel, like the video. It really helps me. I love you.